"Sir, are you hiding something in that prosthetic?" The TSA agent's voice was sharp, loud enough to draw attention. His eyes narrowed at the older man's high-tech leg. Harold Hank Brody, 72, stood tall. "It's a microprocessor-controlled limb," he said calmly. "Removing it here isn't safe." The agent smirked. "Rules are rules, hero. Take it off or you're not flying." Minutes later, Hank sat humiliated in a cramped screening room, gripping the limb that had cost him so much. Then everything stopped. The terminal fell silent. Boots approached. A cold, commanding voice echoed through the checkpoint. "This is Secretary of Defense General Beckett. Agent Mercer, report to me immediately." What followed stunned the entire airport and made headlines across the country. Harold Hank Brody, 72 years old, still carried himself with the posture of a soldier, shoulders back, chin firm, eyes alert. His silver hair was cropped short, and although age had crept into his joints, it hadn't dulled his spirit. The man had been through 2 wars: Vietnam, when he was barely out of high school, and Iraq, decades later, as a senior non-commissioned officer brought back to train younger soldiers in counterinsurgency. He bore the scars of both conflicts, but none more visible than the high-tech prosthetic that had replaced his lower left leg. The limb was a marvel of modern engineering, a matte black microprocessor-controlled prosthesis with a responsive joint system, embedded sensors, and adaptive terrain response software. It was lightweight yet durable, allowing Hank to walk without a cane and even manage stairs with a practiced ease. He didn't flaunt it nor hide it. It was part of him now, like his medals, like his memories. He treated it the same way he treated his uniform back in the day, with quiet respect. That morning, Hank had risen before dawn in Flagstaff, Arizona. The light was barely breaking over the mountains when he finished his cup of black coffee and packed the final items into his carry-on: a change of clothes, his medication, and a manila folder containing the speech he would deliver at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. The topic: living with combat injury and the evolving role of prosthetics in helping veterans reclaim independence. The event meant more to Hank than just a podium and a microphone. It was a reunion of sword surgeons, therapists, engineers, and fellow veterans who had all played a role in his recovery journey. Many of them he hadn't seen in over a decade. He had been chosen to speak, not because he was the most decorated, but because he never gave up through the pain, through the rehab, through the years of learning to trust a piece of machinery where bone and muscle used to be. He dressed in travel slacks designed to accommodate the prosthetic comfortably, a light blue shirt, and his dark navy blazer with the small American flag pin he wore only on meaningful days. There was nothing flashy about him, no demand for attention, just a man who had served his country, suffered in silence, and now stood ready to speak on behalf of others who could not. By the time he arrived at the airport, Hank was calm, focused, and as always, prepared just not for what was coming next. The Flagstaff airport wasn't large, but its TSA checkpoint still bustled with early morning energy, families with strollers, business travelers on phones, and retirees like Hank moving with quiet efficiency. He'd been through dozens of checkpoints over the years and had learned to navigate them with patience and grace. The key was simple: stay calm, answer questions, and expect a secondary screening. It was part of the routine, but this time was different. As Hank stepped through the body scanner, a soft beep echoed, followed by a flash on the monitor. He stood still, unfazed. The alert had likely come from his prosthetic leg, as usual. He turned calmly toward the officer nearby, a young man in his mid-20s, freshly pressed blue uniform, hair cut so sharply it looked like a regulation requirement in itself. His name tag read Mercer. "Sir," the agent said, taking 2 strides forward, "I'm going to need to conduct a pat-down around your lower leg." His voice wasn't rude, but it was louder than necessary, drawing glances from nearby travelers. "No problem," Hank replied, his voice smooth and measured. "It's a microprocessor prosthetic. I declared it with my boarding pass. I've also got documentation if needed." Mercer didn't even glance at the papers Hank offered. His eyes dropped to the limb with suspicion, and his tone hardened. "Microprocessor controlled, huh?" He said it like Hank had made the term up. "I'm going to need you to step aside for additional screening." Hank nodded and followed him to the side area, a few feet from the main scanner. Travelers began lining up behind him, some watching, some pretending not to. Hank had long grown used to the occasional curious stare. But then Mercer spoke again, this time with more bite. "We'll need you to remove it for separate X-ray screening." The words hung in the air for a moment. Hank blinked. "Remove it?" he asked, still calm. "Officer, this isn't just a strap-on. It's a precision-fitted limb. Taking it off here is medically risky, not to mention extremely undignified." Mercer crossed his arms. "Rules are rules, hero. Prosthetic off, or you're not flying." The last word hit like a slap. Hank caught it. The mocking way Mercer had said hero, not with admiration, with sarcasm, a challenge, a dismissal. "Listen, I've traveled through more airports than I can count." Hank replied, voice low, trying to keep the situation from spiraling. "I always go through the additional checks, no complaints. This isn't the way TSA typically handles it." Mercer smirked. "Well, I'm not typical." "You're trying to hide something too in that thing," he added, gesturing at the prosthetic. "You'd be surprised what people try." Hank's jaw tightened. Around them, people were now openly watching. A mother ushered her kids away. A businessman frowned and looked down. No one intervened. No supervisor appeared. It was just Hank and Mercer, one clinging to dignity, the other to power. Mercer pointed to a small curtained-off cubicle nearby. "You can either remove it in there or not fly today. Your call, public humiliation." That's Stewart. That's what this was now. Not about safety, not about protocol. It was about putting someone in their place. Hank said nothing for a beat. Then, with a nod, he picked up his carry-on and moved toward the cubicle, his gait slow, uneven. The leg he was being asked to remove had once walked him out of a combat zone. Now it was being treated like contraband. He didn't say a word, but deep inside, something cold and old stirred, something forged long ago on foreign soil, when men shouted orders and others had to decide what kind of man they wanted to be. Inside the cramped cubicle, Hank sat down slowly on the hard plastic chair, the corners of the space too narrow for comfort. The flickering fluorescent light above cast a sterile glow over the pale walls. His prosthetic leg, once a symbol of everything he had overcome, now felt like a burden he had to justify, as if he'd done something wrong by needing it. He tried to steady his breathing. Years of discipline kept him from snapping, but his composure was cracking at the edges. From outside the curtain, Agent Mercer barked again, this time with clear irritation. "You done yet, sir?" "We're not going to wait all day." Hank didn't answer immediately. His hand rested on the synthetic calf of his prosthetic. He traced his fingers along its polished carbon shell, feeling the faint scratches from hiking trails and airport terminals alike. It wasn't just metal and fiber. It was part of him now, the closest thing he had to the leg he'd lost when the convoy hit the IED outside Baqaba, Iraq. For a moment, his eyes closed. He could see the dust again, smell the burning rubber, hear the screams of younger soldiers yelling for a medic. He had dragged himself out of that wreckage, using nothing but one arm and what remained of his right leg. Blood soaked through his uniform. The tourniquet they applied saved his life, but the explosion took more than just his leg. It stole time. Years of easy movement and any illusion that war ever leaves a man untouched. A sharp voice outside brought him back. "Supervisor Haney is here," Mercer said, "and she agrees. We follow procedure, no exceptions." A second voice, this one female, added bluntly, Just do what's asked, sir. If it can't be cleared, it can't go through. And then silence again. It wasn't just the prosthetic they were trying to strip away. It was his dignity. He'd dealt with bureaucratic coldness before, but never this blatant, never this personal. He exhaled, slow and steady. Then he reached into his wallet. Tucked behind his V, a card and photo of his granddaughter was a laminated card, faded slightly from time, but still legible. It had been given to him years ago by a Wounded Warrior Project liaison during his final months of rehab. It was labeled plainly, Department of Defense Rapid Veteran Response Line. He had never used it. It always felt like something you kept, just in case, like a fire extinguisher. But this felt like fire. With a steady hand, Hank pulled out his phone and dialed the number. 2 rings. Then a calm, even voice answered, female, professional, Department of Defense Wounded Veteran Executive Liaison. Please state your name, rank, and nature of incident. Hank didn't raise his voice. He didn't rant. Just facts. Command Sergeant. Major Harold Brody, U.S. Army, retired. Tessa checkpoint. Ordered to remove a medically necessary microprocessor prosthetic. Refused to consider alternative screening. Public setting. Flight to Walter Reed for official event, requesting DOD intervention. There was a brief pause. Then the woman said simply, "Understood, Sergeant Major. Please confirm exact location and the TSA agent's name." He did, Sergeant. "Major Brody," she continued, her voice now weighted with purpose, "do not remove your prosthetic. Remain where you are. We are initiating a Code Red protocol for interagency obstruction and veteran dignity violation. Immediate intervention has been authorized." His eyebrows lifted slightly. Code Red. He didn't know what that meant, but she wasn't bluffing. "Expect contact within minutes," she added. "You are not alone, Sergeant Major. Not anymore." The line went dead. For the first time that morning, Hank allowed a small exhale of relief. Not because the situation was over, but because someone, somewhere was finally listening. Outside the curtain, Mercer knocked again, harder this time. "You refusing to comply, sir. Do I need to escalate?" Hank looked toward the door. "No," he muttered quietly, "you already did." 6 minutes, that's all it took. The terminal, which had been a blur of rolling luggage, echoing announcements, and the impatient shuffle of travelers, suddenly hushed. It didn't happen all at once. It was like a ripple, a subtle awareness that something had changed in the atmosphere. TSA agents paused mid-motion. Passengers looked up from their phones. The hum of the airport faded into an unnatural silence. Then came the sound, the unmistakable, deliberate cadence of hard-soled shoes on polished tile military boots, not rushed but purposeful, accompanied by low murmurs and sharp radio clicks. The curtain to Hank's screening cubicle whipped open. Standing there wasn't Agent Mercer nor Supervisor Haney, but a woman in a black suit, flanked by 2 men with earpieces and rigid postures. She had the presence of someone used to getting things done and the clearance to do it fast. "Sergeant Major Harold Brody?" she asked, her voice respectful but brisk. "Yes," Hank said, slowly rising. "I'm Deputy Assistant Secretary Carlson, Office of the Secretary of Defense. You'll need to come with me. General Beckett is here and wishes to speak with you personally." Hank blinked. He'd heard the name before. General James Beckett, Secretary of Defense, former commander of Joint Special Operations Command, a legend in military circles. But here, he followed Carlson out of the cubicle. The terminal was still frozen. The entire TSA checkpoint had halted. No bags being scanned, no passengers moving. The agents stood awkwardly at their stations, unsure whether to speak or step. Aside, in the center of it all, near the main scanner, stood a man whose very presence shifted the room. Tall, in his late 60s, uniform ribbons on his chest, steel in his gaze. General Beckett. Beside him were Pentagon security officers, senior aides, and one grim-looking official from the Department of Homeland Security. Mercer stood to the side, pale and fidgeting. Supervisor Haney was rigid, lips pressed tight, eyes darting between Beckett and her agent, like a student caught cheating during inspection. Beckett didn't speak immediately. His eyes swept the room first, taking in every frozen face, every silent bystander. When he turned to Hank, his expression changed. "Command Sergeant Major Brody," he said, stepping forward with an outstretched hand. "You should never have had to call us." Hank shook his hand. "Didn't think anyone would come," he said quietly. Beckett turned now, facing Mercer and Haney. His voice, when it came, was crisp and lethal. "I want to be perfectly clear. Ordering a decorated combat veteran to remove a medically necessary prosthetic in public against agency protocol, medical advice, and human decency is not just a failure of training. It is an insult to every service member who has bled for this country." His words echoed across the terminal. Agent Mercer looked like he wanted to disappear. Beckett pointed to him. "Agent Mercer, I read your report on the incident. You dismissed documented medical exemption. You mocked this man's service. And you bypassed all available respectful screening alternatives. Do you deny this?" Mercer stammered. "Sir, I thought the device needed full clearance." "And you thought wrong," Beckett interrupted. "And your smug little power trip ends. Today." He turned to Haney. "Supervisor Haney, you supported that decision. Did you speak to Sergeant Major Brody? Review his credentials? Verify anything beyond what your junior agent claimed?" Haney barely whispered, "No, sir." Beckett's tone dropped into ice. "You both violated the ADA, TSA protocol, and basic human respect. Effective immediately, this checkpoint is suspended. All screening rerouted. You're relieved of duty pending investigation." Gasps came from the passengers. Phones were up, recording. Beckett looked at the crowd. "Let this be understood. Veterans will not be humiliated at the hands of incompetence. Not in this country. Not while I'm Secretary of Defense." And just like that, the terminal was no longer a place of silence. It was the epicenter of a reckoning. The checkpoint was still suspended. No bins clattered down the rollers. No suitcases shuffled forward. No boarding passes beeped. The terminal had become a theater, and every person inside was now an audience to something they hadn't expected: accountability. General Beckett stood tall, not behind a podium, but squarely in the center of the terminal's heart. Travelers crowded near the checkpoint ropes, phones up, brows furrowed. Some whispered, others watched with open reverence. He didn't raise his voice, but every word carried like thunder. "I want every traveler in this terminal, every American watching this, and every federal agency paying attention to hear what I say next," Beckett began. "Prosthetics are not threats. They are not suspicious devices. They are badges of sacrifice." He turned slightly, gesturing toward Hank, who stood quietly just to his right. This man lost his leg defending this nation in combat. And instead of respect, he was treated like a liability. Instead of gratitude, he was met with suspicion. That ends now. The room was still, but emotion began to stir in the crowd. Some nodding, some wiping their eyes. Even a young TSA agent stationed at a neighboring lane lowered his gaze in quiet shame. General Beckett continued, his tone firm but composed. "Effective immediately. I am ordering a comprehensive retraining program across all TS, a facility's nationwide mandatory instruction on 8A compliance, interagency conduct with wounded veterans, and the human dignity owed to those who have sacrificed for this country." He paused. "If that means pulling agents off duty for days, so be it. If it means reassigning leadership that doesn't uphold those standards, that will happen, too." We are not a nation that turns a blind eye to disrespect in uniform, whether it's on the battlefield or at a security gate. There was silence, but the kind that buzzed with collective agreement. Beckett turned again to Hank, Sergeant Major. "Brody, I can't undo what happened this morning, but I won't allow you to miss your speech because of it. My aircraft is waiting on the tarmac. You'll be flying to D.C. with me as my guest." Hank blinked, caught off guard. "General, that's not necessary." "Yes," Beckett interrupted gently, "it is. You've already done more for this country than most ever will. The least we can do is get you to Walter Reed in the way you deserve, not walking alone down some crowded jetway, but with the full respect of this nation behind you." A few people clapped, then more. The quiet applause grew until the terminal echoed with it, not like a cheer, but like a salute. Hank glanced around, humbled. This wasn't about pride. It was about something deeper, about being seen, about being valued. Beckett offered a nod to his team. "Escort Sergeant Major Brody through. We've got a plane to catch." As the two men began walking toward the exit, military aides flanking them, Beckett turned for one final moment to the assembled crowd. "If any of you ever see a veteran being disrespected, don't stand idle. Say something, do something. We owe them more than silence." And with that, they walked on, leaving behind an airport forever changed, not just in procedure, but in spirit. A few minutes later, a child near the back whispered to his mother, "Who was that man?" She replied softly, eyes glistening, "That's a real leader." By the time Harold Hank Brody landed in Washington, D.C., the story had already broken wide open. Someone in the terminal had caught the entire confrontation on video, from the moment General Beckett arrived to his statement before the crowd. The footage, less than 6 minutes long, was raw and unpolished, but it struck a nerve. By noon, it had gone viral. Veteran humiliated at TS, a checkpoint Secretary of Defense shuts it down. General Beckett confronts TSA in fiery airport speech. Prosthetic treated like weapon, real hero treated like threat. Every major network replayed the clip in rotation. CNN, Fox News, NBC. Even late-night anchors opened with the story. The video had it all. Injustice, authority, a reckoning in real time. And above all, a decorated veteran finally being seen and defended when it mattered. Social media exploded. Hashtags like #HonorHank, #prosthetics are not threats, and #VetDignity now trended for days. Within hours, thousands of veterans began sharing their own stories. Tailies poured in of prosthetics swabbed without warning, of medals questioned, of service. Animals blocked from flights. Men and women from Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, and peacetime alike stepped forward. One retired Marine tweeted, "Hank Brody stood up for all of us who stayed quiet too long. That man isn't just a hero, he's a reminder." Another post read, "We trained to serve with honor. We didn't train to be treated like suspects when we come home." Faced with public outrage, the Transportation Security Administration issued a formal national apology within 24 hours. It was rare and contrite, almost pleading. "We deeply regret the treatment of Command Sergeant Major Harold Brody and acknowledge that our procedures failed to provide the dignity and respect owed to our wounded veterans. We are committed to immediate reforms, including mandatory retraining across all screening personnel." But that wasn't enough. Veterans organizations mobilized fast: the American Legion, Wounded Warrior Project, Disabled American Veterans Calling for accountability beyond just apologies. Congressional leaders took notice. By week's end, a bipartisan panel had announced a formal hearing titled "Dignity in Transit: Ensuring Veterans and Disabled Passengers Are Respected at CSEA Checkpoints." Testimonies were requested from TSA leadership, military advocacy groups, and yes, Hank Brody himself. When he appeared before the Senate committee 2 weeks later, he wasn't interested in media glory. Dressed in a simple suit, wearing his old unit pin, He spoke plainly. I didn't ask to be treated like a hero, but I didn't deserve to be treated like a threat either. Veterans carry wounds you can see and a lot you can't. The least this country can do is meet them with decency when they travel through its gates. The chamber was silent. His words weren't flashy, but they hit harder than any headline. In the months that followed, new TSA policies were implemented. Nationwide private screening rooms became mandatory for prosthetic inspections. Agents received advanced training on 8A protocols, and designated veteran liaison officers were introduced at major airports. What started as one man's quiet humiliation had turned into something greater, a national conversation, a course correction, and a long overdue act of respect. And through it all, Hank remained humble. He had walked into that airport as just another traveler. He walked out as a symbol, not of anger, but of quiet, earned dignity. The auditorium at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center was filled to capacity. Doctors in white coats, researchers in crisp suits, military personnel in uniform, and veterans from every era seated in neat rows. On stage, a polished wooden podium bore the Department of Defense seal, flanked by flags and a large projection screen displaying the event's theme, Resilience Through Innovation, the Future of Prosthetics. Harold Hank Brody had been scheduled to speak weeks in advance, but after what had happened at the airport, his presence carried a different weight. He wasn't just a keynote speaker anymore. He was a national name, a symbol of quiet strength, of injustice overcome, of dignity reclaimed. Still, Hank walked onto the stage without fanfare. No dramatic music, no flashy video introduction. Just the quiet tap of his dress shoes, one standard leather, the other carbon composite. As he approached the microphone, he paused for a moment, looked over the crowd. Then he began, "When I first stood on one leg beside the remains of the other, I thought my life was over," he said plainly. "Not just because of the pain, but because I wasn't sure what kind of man I'd be if I didn't walk the same way I used to." The room was silent. But the thing about a prosthetic limb is it doesn't replace who you were. It helps carry who you are forward. He spoke of the early days in recovery, the phantom pain, the frustration of learning to walk again, the engineers who worked tirelessly to customize his new leg, the nurses who encouraged him when he wanted to give up. He spoke of pride, of silence, of how wounded veterans often learn to navigate airports, job interviews, and everyday life like a second battlefield, one full of stairs, discomfort, and quiet prejudice. And then he pivoted. "I thought I'd come here today to talk about technology," he said, glancing toward the screen that had been prepared to show slides of limb advancements. "But after this week, I realize what we need more than innovation is recognition." A murmur rippled through the crowd. He continued, "A prosthetic limb isn't a security threat. It isn't a burden. It's a chapter written in sacrifice, in survival, in service." He took a slow breath, then delivered his final line, not with anger, but with certainty. "We don't wear these limbs to hide, we wear them to remember." For a beat, the room was still. Then the applause began, first polite, then rising in force. Uniformed men and women stood, doctors stood, visitors stood. The entire auditorium rose to its feet in a powerful, unified ovation. Some wiped their eyes. Others simply stood in silence, hands folded in respect. From the side of the stage, General Beckett watched without saying a word. He didn't need to. The message had already landed, and it would carry far beyond the walls of Walter Reed. Later that day, reporters would quote Hank's closing line across news outlets and social media. But for those in the room, it wasn't just a quote. It was a truth etched not just in metal and carbon fiber, but in memory and pain, in honor, and most of all, in the quiet, unshakable dignity of a man who walked in wounded, but stood unbroken. The early morning light over Flagstaff cast a soft, orange hue on the mountains as Harold Hank Brody stepped off the small regional plane, his carry-on slung over one shoulder and his gait steady but deliberate. The terminal was quiet, nothing like the chaos of D.C. No press, no armed escorts, just home. He moved through the familiar walkway, slowly passing by the coffee stand where he usually grabbed a black cup on return trips, the rental desk where the same old clerk always greeted him with a nod. Everything was just as it had been before. And yet, something had changed. As he approached the TS, a security area, now mostly empty this time of day, a single young agent stood beside the checkpoint. Tall, maybe mid-20s, the kind of clean-cut kid Hank had seen thousands of during his years in uniform. The agent's posture straightened as soon as he saw Hank coming. There was no line, no scanners beeping, no words spoken, just the moment. The agent took a half-step forward and raised his hand, not to stop Hank, not to question, but to salute. It wasn't exaggerated. It wasn't for show. It was the kind of salute that came from someone who knew, someone who had likely seen the footage, read the headlines, and understood that the man walking through that quiet terminal had fought battles far from home and won right here on American soil. Hank paused, gave the young man a faint smile. He didn't return the salute in the military sense. He was retired, after all, but he did offer a nod that spoke volumes. Acknowledgement, gratitude, brotherhood. And then he kept walking, back into the arms of routine life. There were no cameras. Waiting, no more speeches, just the sound of the sliding door opening and the chill of morning air rushing in. But as he stepped outside, the weight on his shoulders felt lighter, maybe because the country had listened, maybe because respect had been restored, or maybe because in that small gesture, quiet, voluntary, unprompted, he'd seen what true change looked like. It doesn't come from policy alone. It doesn't require rank or power. It starts with a choice. And as the screen fades to black, a simple caption appears. Respect isn't a protocol. It's a choice. In today's fast-paced world, it's easy to forget that the quietest people among us often carry the heaviest burdens and the deepest courage. Hank Brody's story is more than a tale about a TSA incident. It's a reminder of what dignity, service, and honor really mean in a modern society that sometimes forgets the price of its own freedoms. How many times have we seen someone treated unfairly in public, whether it's a veteran, a disabled traveler, or an elderly person, and simply looked away? This story challenges us to rethink that silence. Respect isn't written into every policy. It lives in the choices we make, the way we treat each other, and the courage we show when we speak up. Hank didn't want special treatment. He wanted fair treatment. And that difference is something we should all carry with us. What would you have done if you were in that airport? Would you have spoken up? Would you have recorded the moment? Or maybe offered a quiet nod like that young TSA agent at the end? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What did this story make you reflect on? Have you or someone you know faced something similar? Thank you for watching and listening to this powerful story. If it moved you, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to our channel. We share real stories that honor those who often go unnoticed, and we'd be honored to have you with us. And remember, as Hank showed us, you don't have to shout to stand tall. You just have to choose respect every single day. We'll see you in the next story. Until then, stay kind, stay strong, and stay listening.